I'm doing another porch devotional. I call it a porch devo. As you can tell, I'm in a porch swing, and this is an old wooden swing. In fact, I need to redo it, and the reason I'm backing it up like that is so you can see it. See, my dad built this swing, and this swing's a little bit like a thinking booth. Early in the morning, I will come out here while it's still dark, and this swing faces the east, so I see the sun come up in the area of Louisville, Kentucky, and I watch the sun come up. Sometimes it's cloudy and it's not very good, and a lot of times it's really good, and I do apologize for my sunglasses, but I need to see in order to bring you this devotional. So these are transitional lenses, and anytime I'm in the sun, they just turn dark. I know that Chris and Frank did a whole show out of the fellowship hall with their sunglasses on, trying to be really cool. I thought they really looked cool, actually. So, but mine's for the reason of reading or seeing, and so I didn't just put on sunglasses to be cool. But anyway, this swing, my dad built it for me and Joyce years and years and years ago. And so, like I said, I have my Bible on my phone because it lights up, and I can read the Bible and watch the sunrise. And there's some beautiful sunrises coming up over Louisville a lot of mornings. But see, the thing is that this swing is like I said, it's like stepping into a thinking booth. And since my dad died and we had his funeral, when I sit here, I start to think about him. In fact, every time I see this swing, I think about him. He taught me a lot of valuable lessons in life, and the thing about my dad is he didn't always teach with what he said. It was more like he modeled life. I never met anybody that worked with him, worked for him, that he was being supervised by, the big companies he worked for in construction. Never heard anybody say an unkind thing about my dad. He was the same all the time to everybody. He really treated people fairly, no matter what station of life they might be in. Now, this thinking booth reminds me of the things that my dad taught me and that I can apply to my life. So this swing, this thinking swing, if you want to put it that way, a teaching moment came to my mind, and I've told this story a lot of times to a lot of people, but it goes all the way back to when I was 14 years old. We lived about 100 yards from the front door of my little church where I grew up, and my dad was everything in that church but the preacher, and he did some lay speaking, as they would call it back in those days. But after church one Sunday, that fateful Sunday that I remember, I asked Dad, I said, Dad, I was 14 years old, I had a bicycle. I said, Dad, can I ride out to Keith's house? Keith was one of my cousins. They live way out in the country. I don't know how many miles it is out there, but I said, I would love to go out and just, stomp around with Keith and Glenn a little bit, my other cousin, his brother. And I said, would that be okay? And Dad said, sure. Says, you can go, but you know that youth group meets at 5:30. And I expect you to be back in time for youth group. I said, oh, I can do that easy, Daddy. I'll leave early enough. He said, all right, but I'm telling you, you need to be back for youth group. Now the reason, a couple of reasons. My dad believed that youth group was very important for his son, but the other reason was he was one of my youth coaches. He was one of the leaders for the youth, and so it looked bad to him, and it was embarrassing to him that he was a leader and that his son would not be in youth group. So he made it clear to me that he expected me to be back, and I said, I'll be back. Well, I headed back from Keith and Glenn's house, and as boys will do, there's running water along a little creek all the way back into my little town of Rincon, Georgia. And I stopped, and I remember this very clearly. I played in that water a little bit and did a few things, as boys would do, and I continued to ride. And I didn't have a watch or anything back in those days, so I didn't know what time it was, but I wasn't in a big hurry. I didn't really think of being late for youth group. But here's what happened. I rode up in my front yard, right, and right by the carport, which is an open carport. And just as I rode up on my bike and I laid it down or put the kickstand down, I can't remember that little detail, I saw my daddy coming out of the front door of that little lapboard church. And like I said, it was about 100 yards through a big, huge pine thicket, but there was a good path, and it was clear, so I saw him coming out, and youth group was over. Well, my dad walks fast anyway, but that day it was a stomping walk. Oh, he was motivating, let me tell you. Well, he came right toward me, and he didn't say much except when he passed me, he said, "Come go with me," or something like that. So I followed my dad. I was a pretty obedient son, except for being at youth group on time. And so he walked across the concrete carport, and I walked right behind him. He went through the kitchen door, through the kitchen, and I was right behind him. He went through the dining room into the hallway, and my room was the first door on the right after you started into the hall. Well, he turned into my room. I followed him in there, and he closed the door. And I thought to myself, I don't think I'm going to like this next part of this little conversation we're about to have. Well, it wasn't a conversation, it was school. My dad was about to teach me a valuable lesson about what he thought was important for his son, and I've never forgotten it. He said, "Undo your jeans and let them fall." Well, as I was doing that, he was pulling off his thin leather belt. Back then it was a really thin little belt. And I knew what was coming up. It was a lesson that I probably needed to learn, but I didn't want to actually have that lesson, but it came. And my dad striped my legs pretty good with that little thin belt. And he told me, he says, "You told me you would be back by youth group and you were not, and I expected you to be there." And sure enough, he said, that was embarrassing to me as a leader, and it didn't reflect very well on our family name for you to tell me you were going to do something and you didn't do it. So you remember this and let it be a lesson in your life. And, I wasn't going to get away from Dad because my pants were down around my ankles. And like I said, so he put some pretty good stripes on my legs. And I still remember that. Because you see, my dad, he thought how important it is to be involved in worship and in church, and particularly for teenagers. He wanted me in youth group, and I didn't make it. Now, those stripes were painful, but the lesson was clear. You lead by example, and in Dad's eyes, I sinned, and I say that because I missed the mark. You know, the word in the New Testament, the Greek word for sin is harmatia. It is an archery term. If you had a bullseye out there or an archery target, and it had a bullseye, and maybe you missed the whole target. Maybe you just were off of the bullseye just a little bit when you shot your arrow. That means you missed the mark. The mark is the bullseye. And so harmatia is sin because God gives us marks. God expects us to be holy in our lives. He expects us to live by what He tells us. He expects our obedience to Him. And when we are not obedient, we sin against God. Well, that Sunday afternoon, I sinned against my dad. And my dad, he had given me a mark, and I missed it. See, I sinned by the way that was the last time my dad punished me that way. I mean, I was 14 years old, but I was a small kid. I was still about 5'7", 7.5, or 8 maybe at the most, and I'm only 5'8.5" now, and I think I'm shrinking. But my dad never punished me again. He never gave me a whipping again. And I was too old for that. But boy, I'll never remember that day. because my dad made an impression upon me, not just the stripes on my legs, but the impression that, look, when you tell somebody you're going to do something and you promise them, when you miss the mark, you sinned against them. When we miss the mark in our holiness before God, we sin against God. And so that was a lesson I learned that day. And that was what I call a lasting impression, because I still remember it. Now, I'm 72 years old, and I think it's been several years since Dad did that, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. So let me leave you with this thought. Do your best as a disciple of Jesus, as a follower, not to miss the mark when it comes to the things that God requires of us, like holiness, goodness, all those things, truthfulness, the things that really matter in life. By not being loving enough to other people, by not seeing how God can use me. When I miss the mark, I sin. So I would caution you to pay attention to what the Father says. I didn't pay attention close enough to what my father said. Now Dad's gone on to be with the Lord, and I miss him. But now this old porch swing's still here, and it's very comfortable, by the way, made with my dad's hands. So I can't even get away from this lesson because it's always with me. And that's the way God's lessons should be for each one of us. I hope you enjoy these porch devos, because I've enjoyed bringing them. This is the second one, by the way, and we'll do some more. So until I see you again, you have a great evening and a great day tomorrow. And you remember to be obedient to God. When you make a promise, He keeps His. We need to keep ours. If we don't, we miss the mark.